It's time to pick our next series for Catch Up Book Club. So if you guys are unfamiliar with Catch Up Book Club, it is a YouTube epic fantasy book club that I've been running since 2018 that is designed to help you guys, and also me too, keep up with and finish really long epic fantasy series. The one rule for Catch Up Book Club is that whatever we pick has to be more than one series set in the same world. So to give you guys some examples of that, in 2018 we started off with Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. We then moved on to the entirety of Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, which I think is like 5 series. We then read all of Joe Abercrombie's First Law World, and we've just finished everything published by John Gwynne. We started off with just his 2 series set in the Banished lands. Then we also tacked on the Bloodsworn Saga as well, which is his Norse mythology inspired trilogy, just for funsies. So as you can see, we've read a lot of really popular, well-loved and well-regarded adult epic fantasy worlds. And so now the decision-making process feels a lot harder, especially because these read-alongs are such a big commitment. I think we were reading Robin Hobb for like 2.5 years. So getting into a series of that length, not necessarily knowing if we're going to love it, feels a little bit daunting. So over the last few months, we have been thinking of all of the fantasy series that we could read that fit this criteria, and we have narrowed it down to these 4 contenders, all of which we're really excited to read, but each of them have a potential drawback that may not make them the perfect fit for the book club. And instead of committing to one of these series blind, I have been tasked with reading all of them to try and make a decision. So let me introduce you to the contenders. Starting off with Michael J. Sullivan's Books of Elin. I've seen a lot of you guys down in the comments really excited about us potentially reading this for the book club. It is the largest commitment of the bunch though. This series currently stands at 20 books and it is not finished. According to his blog, he has 9 more books set in this world still in the works. This world is currently broken down into 4 series, but according to the things that he's currently working on, he has 1 book left to publish in one of those and then an additional 2 series to come. The timeline is a little bit all over the place with these ones because we have the Rhaeria Revelations, which is the furthest forward in the timeline, which is the present day, if you will. And then you also have the Rhaeria Chronicles, which follow these characters when they're younger. Then there's a series, which is one of his most popular, which is set 3,000 years, I think, before this. And then the last series is 1,000 years after that, without the ones to come. Michael J. Sullivan himself recommends that you read these in publication order as opposed to chronological order, because if you go for chronological, then you will be exposed to the plot reveals in a different order than Michael J. Sullivan intended you to read them. So that is the order that we are going to be going with if we do choose this one. And for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be reading the first half of this bind up, which is the Crown Conspiracy. For the Rhaeria Revelation series, there are 3 bind ups with 2 books each in them. This is the series that the hosts were the most excited about, and the audiobooks are narrated by Timothy Gerard Reynolds, which is great news for me because that is my favorite audiobook narrator. The drawback with this series though is that Michael J. Sullivan has had a lot of different publishers in the past, and that means that some of the installments in this series are quite difficult to come by. Waterstones, which of course is the biggest chain of bookstores in the UK, do not stock all of Michael J. Sullivan's books. Amazon do not even stock all of Michael J. Sullivan's books. They are relatively accessible on Libby, of course, depending what library systems you're connected to, but some of the installments in this series could be a little trickier to get hold of, which is why we're a little hesitant to just go ahead and choose this one for the book club. Although with this read along potentially taking such a long time, it does give people plenty of time to keep an eye out and try and hunt down the copies of this book. These books are a little bit shorter than we typically read for Catch Up Book Club as well, with most of the installments sitting at around 300 to 400 pages. So our typical schedule would probably need reworking a little bit to suit this one. The next contender is the Ravens books by Anthony Ryan. This is the shortest one in the mix. This is only 5 books total, comprised of a trilogy and then a sequel duology. So the reading order of this is super simple. I'm pretty sure both of the series follow the same character. I'm pretty sure that this is a a heroic kind of fantasy. We're following somebody who is chronicling his life as he joins this like elite order of fighters and trains to be a part of them. I'm not really sure where the plot goes from there, but the drawback with this one is that while book one is very, very well loved and very highly regarded, and even two of our hosts have read this and absolutely love it, it's kind of well talked about that the sequels in this original trilogy are not quite as good as book one. The good news is that it looks like the follow-on duology picks up and people really like those books, but if we go with this one, we're kind of asking people to commit to a series that we're pretty sure is going to go downhill for a little bit after the first book, and not everybody's going to be on board for that. Another big commitment is Philip C. Quaintrell's World of Verda. This one is currently 17 books across 3 series, but I don't know if Philip C. Quaintrell has any further plans to extend this world after he's finished publishing his Time of Dragons series, I think is the one that he is currently working on. The structure of this world is very similar to Michael J. Sullivan. This one is the first book in the Echo Saga, which is 9 books long and follows a ranger called Asher. There is then a second series following Asher, although it is a prequel set, I think around 10 to 15 years before this one, when he's training to be an assassin. And then we have the Time of Dragons series, which is set 1,000 years before the present day, which would be this series. Now, I personally prefer to read in chronological order, and the reading order of this world is a circle. However, we can't currently do that because the Time of Dragons series only has 3 out of 5 books currently published, and we're going to be starting the read-along before those 2 later books come out. So for the purpose of the read-along, if we do choose this one, and also for the purpose of this video, we are going to be starting with the present day, which is the Echo Saga. And Philip C. Quaintrell has said that there are Easter eggs throughout all of his books, so it doesn't really matter which series you start with first. There should be points that you can connect to the other series you've read, no matter which one that you start with, which honestly is pretty cool. So the hosts are also really excited about this one, but the drawback is that this is an indie series, which is a great thing, and I love supporting indies. However, it does come with some accessibility issues. The benefit is that all of these books are available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a Kindle, if you have a KU subscription, you will have easy access to them. However, if you are somebody who prefers to borrow books from the library, if you prefer to shop at your local indie bookstore, these books are going to be a lot harder to get your hands on because, as with most indies, the main distributor of these books is Amazon. If this book sounds interesting to you, or this series, and you want to pick it up in the future, the Broken Binding are going to be traditionally publishing at least the Time of Dragons series. However, given that the read-along would start pretty soon, that doesn't really help us out. All I know about this one is that it has something to do with a war between elves and humans, where elves are trying to take the world back from humans, and our dominant character is Asher, who is a ranger who is over 1,000 years old. However, he doesn't remember most of it. And then our final contender is another one of the shorter options. This one is 7 books total, and it is Trudy Canavan's Magician series. This one is 2 trilogies, one following on from the other, so a direct sequel series, and also a prequel standalone to the entire thing. Now, there is no clear direction on which order you should read these books in. You can read the prequel apparently at any point throughout the reading process of these 2 series, as long as you just read the 2 trilogies in order. Now, like I said, I do prefer to read in chronological order. However, I feel like I will get a better feel for this series if I start with the first book in the Black Magician trilogy as opposed to the standalone prequel, but we may decide to do it another way round if we choose this one. All I know about this is that we are following a young girl who has magical abilities, and she ends up training to be a magician with the Magician's Guild. Now, I'll be honest, there is no real drawback to choosing this series, aside from the fact that it is the one that the hosts are the most unenthusiastic about. But I have owned this series for a really long time, and so I thought I would throw it in there as a contender, as I know that this is a case where we have more than one series set in the same world. So now that I've introduced you to all 4 contenders, it's time to get reading. But at this point in the video, down in the comments, let me know which of these 4 books you would rather we picked for the book club, and also which of the 4 you think I'm going to enjoy the most. So I am just shy of 100 pages into Theft of Swords, or should I say The Crown Conspiracy, which is the first book in this little bind up. And can we talk about how instantly compelling this book is? First off, it has long chapters. In this first book, there are 10 chapters. So we're averaging like 31 pages per chapter, which can be a little bit tough, especially getting into a new fantasy series. You know, I want to be building a little bit of momentum. I have been sucked into this from the very first chapter. I literally read a full 500-page epic fantasy book not long ago, the first book in a series, and still could not decide how I felt about it without feeling the need to read book 2 to kind of compound on what I've read. And this has me hooked from the off. The two main characters in here are, of course, Royce and Hadrian. Royce is a thief. He's described as being quite small in stature. He's an orphan. He grew up on the streets. We also find out that he was potentially a prisoner in a prison that doesn't release people, but also nobody's ever escaped from, which is interesting. And then, of course, Hadrian is a mercenary and he is large of stature. So we have this very obvious physical size difference between them, but he's also very jolly in comparison to Royce. And you are instantly sucked in by their camaraderie at the beginning of this book because they kind of have a good cop, bad cop dynamic about them. So before we even learn anything about this world, before we learn anything about the plot, the politics, we learn about Royce and Hadrian. I like the humor in here. I feel like a lot of it is created by the contrast in their personalities. Hadrian has a code of honor that Royce doesn't necessarily disagree with, but it's definitely not his driving motive. We don't really know a lot about Hadrian's background at this point, but I feel like he's had a little bit of a better upbringing than Royce had. And I feel like Royce's need to kind of fight for everything that he's ever had in his life, growing up on the streets, potentially being in a prison, has really shaped who he is as a person. Whereas Hadrian is a lot more forgiving. He feels bad for people a lot more. He's willing to take chances. He's a little bit more trusting. And Royce is his polar opposite. So a lot of the comedy in this book is in the dialogue between these two, who work really well together as a team despite being very different people. So very early on in this book, we establish that Royce and Hadrian are very good at what they do. They are in fact renowned for it. And they are a thieving duo known as Rhaenyra, which I did not know that was what Rhaenyra meant. I thought that Rhaenyra was the world in here, if I'm being honest. But the crux of the plot is that they are approached by a guy who would like to employ them. However, the job is very last minute. He has been caught staring at this guy's wife, and anytime anybody looks at this guy's wife, he challenges them to a duel. And he has this, I don't know if the sword is magic, but essentially the only duel that he's ever lost was when he didn't have his sword. So this guy wants Royce and Hadrian to steal into the castle at night and to remove this sword so that when he goes to his duel in the morning, this lord won't have the sword that will allow him to best him in the duel and essentially kill him. Now, the person that he's appealing to is Hadrian. And of course, Hadrian being Hadrian, he accepts the job. And when he goes back to tell Royce, Royce is not happy. But, you know, he's accepted the job. This man's going to pay well. And so they go ahead with it, only to find out when they arrive at the castle that this is actually an epic setup and that somebody has killed the king and they are being framed for it. And this puts Royce and Hadrian on this chaotic path that has seemingly been orchestrated by somebody else who is like playing mastermind from the background. And they're just kind of rolling with it and dealing with it in the moment. So it's actually really interesting that I'm enjoying this so much at this point, because when it comes to epic fantasy, I normally like to be introduced to the world first. I want to know about the law, the history, the political climate. Give me all of the world building, but it's the characters that lead this story. The way that the story is being told at the minute, it's kind of like the world is secondary. It's being fleshed out around the characters. So we're getting descriptions about the landscape. We're being told about the names of villages, towns, and cities, but the way that it's being narrated is almost like this is just a point of reference to flesh out the story and give the landscape more dimension while these characters are moving through it, as opposed to something that you need to retain for later. Now, what I'm interested in going forward in this book is to see what threads of an epic plot line emerge. I have no idea what the overarching plot of this series is. The synopsis says that it contains an ancient mystery which has toppled kings and destroyed empires, but so far where I'm at, we've had no signs of that, and I'm excited to get into a little bit more, because right now this is obviously a fantasy, but aside from the mention of elves, we haven't actually had anything fantastical happen. 200 pages in feels like a great time for another update on this book, and I am still taken aback by how compulsively readable this one is. I feel like I could go on forever. I have about 110 pages left of this first installment, and I feel like resisting the urge to just carry on through this entire thing is going to be really difficult, which is not something I ever associate with high fantasy or epic fantasy, especially at the beginning of the series. This is quite a short book. I don't think it feels like it though. I don't know whether that's because I'm listening to the audiobook on quite a slow speed. I'm reading along at the same time because your girl loves immersion reading, and Timothy Gerard Reynolds being the narrator for the audiobooks for this just make it even better. That's actually the reason why I've been so excited to read this series. I've heard really good things about it in general, but knowing that I get the added benefit of my favorite fantasy audiobook narrator has meant that the hype has been real for this one. Something else that I don't expect from epic high fantasy is to be so immediately connected to the characters, even the ones that are not Royce and Hadrian that we've had introduced just in this installment. I am loving. I like the little sprinkle of humor that we have in the dialogue. I think I found a sweet spot for humor in fantasy for me, because y'all know, like, funny books especially fantasy, like I like my fantasy to be serious, but I find when we balance humorous dialogue and rapport between characters with a more serious plot, or at least a plot that the characters are taken seriously, I really like that juxtaposition. I don't know how this is going to play out in terms of a series at this point, and I think that's another reason why I'm so tempted to just like blast through this entire thing, because we do have some inklings into the fantastical elements in this world, and I think I've already picked up on some Easter eggs. So I'll tell you one, because it's not a spoiler, it can't be a spoiler because I haven't read anything else but this book, and it's not a spoiler for this book, but during the quest that is in this first installment, Royce and Hadrian talk about Drummondor, which I think they said is a dwarven prison. Now, I know through researching this series as a contender for Catch Up Book Club that one of the most recently published installments in this world is called Drummondor, and I'm pretty sure that the Rhaenyra Chronicles is a prequel to the Rhaenyra Revelations, still following Royce and Hadrian. So I'm pretty sure that the thing that they allude to in here, they essentially like throw back in conversation, like, remember Drummondor? And I feel like because we have an installment in the Rhaenyra Chronicles called Drummondor, that is going to be narrating what happened at Drummondor that they're referring back to in this one. This is one of the first epic fantasy series I've read where I'll be reading it out of chronological order, and I think that could be really interesting to reread in chronological order once you completed a first read of this series, like in the recommended reading order, to kind of experience everything in the way that they actually played out. Now that we have some elements of the fantasy introduced in here as well, I think I have a little bit more of an idea of what the Legends of the First Empire series is going to entail, because we've already had a couple of references to things that happened in the ancient history of this world that seem quite poignant, so could be what we tackle in the Legends of the First Empire series. Don't tell me as well if I'm right or I'm wrong, because obviously that's something that I want to experience on my own. So if you know, don't tell me. But I just think it's fun to kind of like theorize about what could be coming up just based on the information that I'm getting in this book, and also my limited knowledge of the things that we have to come in this world as a whole. I finished The Crown Conspiracy and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ended up giving it a very high, very solid 4-star rating. The only thing missing in this one for me is a little bit of length, because I like my epic fantasy thick, and also a little bit more meat when it comes to the overarching plot. There are a couple of little hints scattered throughout this of what is to come. There is like a big event in this book that essentially amounts to nothing, which I'm pretty sure is going to come up again at some point in the series. The plot of this one, the Crown Conspiracy, shall we say, with Royce and Hadrian getting tied up in this plot to murder the king and being framed for his death, is all resolved within this first installment. So in regards to the book club, what I'm really looking for is series that we can really dig into. I want to see lore, I want to see foreshadowing, because we love to theorize. We love to pick up on those little clues in the text and predict what is going to come next. And we've had series before where it's very difficult to do that. So I want to make sure that whatever book we pick for the book club has that level of overarching plot where we have things that we can really discuss. And I do think that if we chose this series going backwards in time in the ancient history of this world and then the more recent history, will provide a lot of discussion points. But I did just want to make sure that there was actually an overarching plot there, and that this wasn't just kind of like the adventures of Hadrian and Royce, where each book finds them with a new problem that they have to solve, and it's more just about their camaraderie than it is a plot. So I did look ahead at the synopses for the next 2 installments in this series, like the individual installments, not the bind-ups. And I do think that there are a couple of common threads that are going to present themselves throughout the series. So I am confident that we do have a kind of long game in mind, because this book really sucks you in with the characters of Royce and Hadrian, and 100% will give Michael J. Sullivan his flowers for the world building in here, which is so organic. I'm going into this obviously knowing that we have a series set like 3,000 or something years before the start of this, as well as one following Royce and Hadrian 9 years prior to the start of this book. So I know that there is a lot more in this world, and I'm reading through the lens of knowing that. So there's things that I'm kind of picking up on in here that I think may become relevant or crop up in other books, which honestly is exactly what we're looking for Catch Up Book Club. But to think about this published in 2011 as the first book in this expansive world, and people picking this up not necessarily knowing that they had all of that stuff to come, I think that Michael J. Sullivan does a really good job at hinting to a wilder world out there while still immediately drawing you in with these 2 very likable characters and the rapport that they have between them without overfacing you with information. If you're somebody who's looking for a more in-depth, more complex world, then there is a hint of that to come. But if you're looking for that action adventure story, you can still read this first book and enjoy it without getting into all of that extra lore. I really loved all of the characters in here, and I also really loved the audiobook. Shout out to Timothy Gerard Reynolds for bringing every story to life. I think my favorite character actually was the monk in here, who is called Myron. He was such a sweetie pie, and I also really liked the humor that he brought to the story. As somebody who is super logic based and likes my magic to be very well grounded in like almost science, I like my magic to work in a scientific manner as opposed to just, you know, like being pulled out of nowhere. There were a couple of moments in here where I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit. There's a moment with a tower in this book which I'm pretty sure defies the laws of physics, and it almost had an air of The Princess Bride about it. In some of the more adventure focused scenes, it was given Wesley and The Princess Bride, which honestly, as I haven't read the book yet, it's on my TBR for very soon, but I am a big fan of the movie. So I think that this does a good job of giving you those like fun fantasy adventure vibes. There's a little bit more under there, but if you're looking just for a fun, enjoyable, plot focused read, then it provides that as well. What I do hope for the rest of the series though, if we end up going with this one, I mean, I'm pretty confident at this point I'll continue on with this series regardless of if it is the book club series, but what I would be looking for is a more serious, in-depth, gritty plot where we're not defying the laws of physics, where we have a level of intricacy seeing, we can kind of trace some of these plot points back through the ages, which I do know there are some recurring characters that we've maybe met in this book that we'll see in other series as well, because I've done a little bit of research into what each series focuses on. But yeah, delivery on this, amazing. I just hope that the scope of this world and the plot that goes with it is as epic and complex as I enjoy from this genre. I am 160 pages into The Magician's Guild, and so far this has proven to be a really quick and easy read. It is not dense at all, which is great. It's really accessible, really easy to get into, and the synopsis that's on the back of this actually is just the first 2 chapters of the book. So after the first 40 or so pages, we are moving into the unknown. But what I know about this so far is that we are set in a world where magicians are tightly regulated by the Magician's Guild. Now, the story is very focused on current events at the minute, so we don't really have any history of why the magicians are so tightly regulated, if anything was different in the past. We're solely focused on our current narrative. So there's a lot about this world that at this point I would still really like to learn, but it is understood that the king controls the magicians and they essentially just do whatever he tells them to. Rogue magicians in this world are really bad. I believe that they are magicians that operate outside of the guild. And then you also have people like Sonia who are naturally gifted with magic, because the majority of people can't access their magic unless they're taught how to. So there's some sort of event happening in the city and the magicians have put up a shield and the people of the city are protesting, including our dominant character Sonia, and she picks up a rock and she hurls it at the magicians and it passes right through their shield because unbeknownst to her she does actually possess magic. So obviously being a magician outside of the control of the guild is perceived as bad, and so the magicians start to search for Sonia in the slums of the city so that they can bring her into the guild and train her. However, because of how strictly policed magic is, they typically only search for magicians amongst the noble houses, and the fact that Sonia is from the lower class of this city is proven to be a little bit of a problem when the magicians are trying to decide what they are going to do with her. Now, at the point where I'm at, the search is still on. While we cover everything that I've just told you and everything laid out in the synopsis in the first 2 chapters of this book, the search is taking longer than I expected it to. I believe it's because Trudy Canavan is introducing us to the underbelly of this city. We're dealing with the thieves, people that Sonia typically runs with. It is understood in the first chapter that her aunt and uncle who have raised her have taken her out of the slums of the city for a couple of years, but there's something in this world called an annual purge where the poor people of the city are flushed out, and Sonia's family have become displaced, so she is going back into the slums of the city, reconnecting with people that she used to know a couple of years ago who all come to her aid when she's being hunted down by magicians. I am a little bit surprised at how long the search is taking because I really expected the focus of this book to be on the magic school. I'm pretty sure we are going to get to that part. I don't know whether it's going to be a case of changing the shape of the guild or whether it's going to be a case of breaking apart the guild so that magicians can live outside it in terms of like the whole scope of this series. But I am pretty confident that we're going to get some sort of guild element and Sonia is going to end up joining them, because I feel like that is the perfect opportunity for us to explore this guild construct, which is very clearly integral to this story. And I'm actually looking forward to that, because one of the reasons why I like things like magic schools, trials, tournaments is because they serve as a really good structure and focus for the plot while we learn more about the world, typically through the eyes of a character like Sonia who is unfamiliar with whatever kind of setting or community they are entering into. As of yet, I still have no verdict as to whether this is young adult. Given that Sonia isn't the sole perspective that we follow in here, and we also follow some of the magicians, even though we don't know a lot about them, I think that they are significantly older than Sonia. They're all adults at least. I do think it's more of a case of this is an easily accessible fantasy story that currently has a young adult protagonist, more than it is that this is actually a young adult series. I have just over 100 pages left of The Magician's Guild. I'm on page 334 and we're still going strong in terms of my enjoyment. I'm still having a good time with this. I do feel like it takes a long time to kind of get where it's going though. In that way, I do almost feel like the story has only just started. I did realize as well that this book is split down into sections. So part 2 starts at page 449. So actually, that's quite substantial. There's 200 pages in the second section of this. I'm actually quite shocked by that because I feel like I only just got to part 2, and obviously where I'm at now, I don't have too much of the book left, but I feel like that is a testament to how quickly this book passes. It's definitely one that is easy to get into in that it isn't dense and it doesn't overface you with world building, which I honestly don't mind. I don't mind being met with a lot of information to get you acquainted with the world, but I also don't mind a little bit of a faster introduction, providing I feel like the world is well developed and that you are getting more information about that as the book or the series progresses. And at this point, I'd like a little bit more history on the Magician's Guild, which like we've already discussed. But aside from that, I feel like I have a good understanding of this world and it's definitely one that interests me. It is following the path that I expected it to, where we start to learn more through the main character as she starts to learn more about a facet of this world that she previously wasn't familiar with. And we've also introduced an aspect of political corruption, I want to say, that I'm also quite eager to explore in this one. My only concern about the book at this point is that it is a more plot-focused narrative. The writing style is reminding me of something and I can't figure out what it is. I thought at first it was The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I actually don't think that it is though. It may be The Demon King by Cinder Williams-Chimer, which once again actually is a big world that has more than one series set in it. That one I'm pretty sure is firmly categorized as young adult, but I do feel like it's similar to this in that I feel like it has a lot to offer adults. I read it as an adult and I really enjoyed it, and I think that it's a really interesting like epic high fantasy story that's maybe just a little bit more accessible in the world and the language that it uses. But I do think that the writing in here is a little bit detached in that it is a third person perspective that we are getting. It is multi-perspective and that it flicks between different characters, but not in the traditional way of following a first person perspective of each character per chapter. And it doesn't necessarily have to be first person, but I feel like in multi-POV stories, I am more used to getting an intimate look inside the character's mind, whereas this is more of an overview of what is going on, which I find creates a little bit of distance between myself and the characters, which depending on the kind of story isn't necessarily an issue. I think it's just another indicator that this is more focused on the plot and the narrative that's currently unfolding than it is creating such an intimate connection with the characters. But it is right now the limited view of the world that we have that concerns me about this series in the context of selecting it for the book club. At this point, if the last 100 pages of this book continues as the first 330 pages have, I would be happy to continue this series. I would actually maybe even be eager to do so because I've had such an easy, enjoyable time with this. I just haven't had a lot of indication that the scope of the world and the scope of the problems that we're going to be tackling in this series are enough for us to really dig into in terms of the book club. Michael J. Sullivan gave us little hints of something that may come that he may delve into further. Right now in this, we're solely focused on Sonia and her experience with the guild, and I do feel like it is going to really deeply dive into the guild politics, and the main aim of this series may be to reestablish the guild, tear it down, break it apart, do something to fix the like strict regimented way that they operate that only really serves the elite. And I don't know if that is going to provide enough foreshadowing, lore, world building, Easter eggs for us to really dive into. And I mean, that's not necessary in terms of book club books, just in terms of catch up book club. That is the kind of discussion that we like to have, that we like to pick apart. And so because this time I'm taking the time to actually read the first books in all of these series, those are the kind of things that I'm looking for when it comes to making my final decision. Because I do feel like the likelihood is because of the books that I've selected. I would be surprised if I didn't enjoy all of them. So it's more about what is going to give us enough substance for discussion and what I feel has the most potential than it is which one is my personal favorite. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I do wish that there was a little bit more of a plot twist at the end. I did think that we were leading up to that in terms of like some of the clues and the way we were kind of building to what happened at the end. I thought that it was going to be a little bit more unexpected, which would have been nice, but I still ended up enjoying the book overall and how it wrapped up. This was a really fast-paced, compelling read for me, and I think also in terms of the way that it wrapped up, it made me really interested in going immediately into the next book in the series, which unfortunately at this point I do not own. I would say right now that I'm definitely going to be pursuing this series independently. I definitely want to continue on and read more of this in the future. Obviously, in an ideal world, I would read and enjoy the whole thing. How long it takes me to actually do that though, we'll see. But in terms of the book club, I don't feel like this was as complex as I would like a series to be that we read for the book club. The Michael J. Sullivan book that I read is also a little bit faster paced than we typically go with, but I think that one had a lot more clues and alluded to a lot more going on in not only the background but also the history of the world, while the Trudy Canavan book gave me less reason to believe or hope that we were going to delve into something a little bit more epic in the future. Given that all of the other series we've read for the book club before have been ones that we've gone into completely blind, it wouldn't be the end of the world if we did choose this one for the next era. But in terms of what I'm looking for, I would like to go with something a little bit more complex than this one, but we'll see how everything stacks up like when I'm actually done. So I just got past the page 200 mark. I'm up to part 3 in Rise of the Ranger, and I am thoroughly enjoying this one. The people that I've seen talk about this series really, really love it. So obviously, like all the books in this video, actually I did expect to enjoy this one, but it was also the biggest wild card of the bunch, right? Because with it being indie fantasy, it's not as widely distributed, so generally not as many people have read it, even though this does have quite a lot of ratings for an indie fantasy. I think it has around 13,000, and the average rating on this one is pretty high, but I went in not really knowing what to expect, and it's definitely more complex than I thought that it was going to be, because the Echoes saga I think is going to have a larger scope of plot than I anticipated, which is great news in terms of the book club. That's what we're looking for. But with this first book being called The Rise of the Ranger, and me also knowing that another one of the series set in this world followed the same character at an earlier point in time, I expected the narrative of this to closely follow our ranger character Asher. And even, you know, the synopsis of this, it tells you that Asher is a ranger. He's over 1,000 years old, but he doesn't remember that. Like, he's a human, he's not an elf as well, so he shouldn't have such a long life. In the background of this, we have a world divided that's controlled by humans, and the elves are plotting in the background to gain control of the world once more. But this is not just following Asher, it's not just from Asher's perspective. We have a rich tapestry of characters in this book, so much so that I haven't even got to grips with all of them, because one thing that I would like from this book is the perspective name at the beginning of the chapter, just because then it would be quicker for me to catch up and lock into the character that we're going to be following for that specific chapter, instead of having to get through like the first page and then kind of figure out who we're following and where the last place that I left them was. But we have so many characters in here, I'm not even going to be able to run through them all in the synopsis. One of them, of course, is Asher, and we start this book 1,000 years ago during the fall of the Elven Kingdom. Asher is from one of the biggest, most elaborate elven cities, and he's trying to escape with, I think, his father and his brother. He's going through this tunnel, and there's this bright flash of light, and then he ends up in the middle of nowhere. Like, his family aren't there, and he looks around and he sees that the elven city is in ruins behind him and realizes that something is very, very wrong. Now, we immediately jump to the present timeline where Asher is, I think he's 44 years old, and realize that he must have time traveled into into the future, 1,000 years after the war between the humans and the elves. This war also involved dragons, and I think there was also a little bit of a civil war amongst the elves as well. But Asher becomes more relevant to the central plotline we're following in this book when the king asks him to escort a delegation of elves from the place where their boat is going to be docking to the castle, and to make sure that they get there safely because assassins are going to have been sent to kill them. And the reason why Asher has been chosen is because he was actually raised by the assassins that are like this notorious assassin guild within the world. So he has advanced skills and advanced knowledge to be able to protect these elves from being assassinated. Now, I actually believe that the prequel series we follow with Asher as the central character is surrounding his time at that assassin school, which is going to be really interesting. But one of our other perspectives is a grey coat. They're kind of like the monster hunter protectors of the world. They're not allied to any kingdom, but they protect all of the civilians. And they are also assigned on this mission with Asher, and there's one of them and also his ward that end up getting like a little bit closer to him. We're also following a variety of elven characters. So we have the princess, who is part of the delegation who is coming to treat with the mortal royals, and everyone's super excited because they haven't seen elves in such a long time. We also have this other group of elves who are trying to gain access to this high security island on a mission from their king. We have the mother of the princess who left long ago to try and bring dragons back to the world, and she's been gone for such a long time that everyone assumes that she's never coming back. And then we also follow some students in a magic school, and all of these perspectives seem kind of unrelated, like we're jumping all over the world at the beginning of this book. But as you get further into the book and you learn a little bit more about the world and everything starts clicking into place as you become more familiar with everything, you realize how things are connected, which is where the story is getting a little bit more complex and where I'm getting really, really excited. So I'm not quite halfway through this. I still have a while to go. There are not necessarily issues with the writing. I feel like there are places throughout this book where you can tell that this is Philip C. Quaintrell's like first published book, at least in this series, and some places where the writing doesn't exactly flow, which is taking me out of it just slightly in those instances. But honestly, they are few and far between, and I think that the world and the story of this book is really damn good at this point. Like, I'm excited about this one. So we'll see how the rest of this book plays out. I do have a good feeling about this one, and I'm trying to temper my expectations because I feel like I'm getting a little ahead of myself and I'm getting excited too soon. But I think as I'm starting to see the links between these perspectives, it's pulling me more and more into the story and getting me more invested, which is exactly the kind of thing I'm looking for when it comes to a book club series. I am making good progress in Rise of the Ranger. I'm on page 382 and I have about 120 pages to go. I'm still feeling really good about this one at this point. It still feels really promising. It is a little bit unpolished in parts, which isn't bothering me. I'm still very, very invested, and it's actually not taking me out of the story too much. I do wonder whether that would bother other people though, and obviously with a book club, like, we can't select a series that everybody's going to enjoy. It's very unlikely that's going to happen. I do feel like it's a little bit of a risk selecting an indie series though, not just because it's indie, mainly because it's indie and we're looking at, like, what was it, 17 books in this series, which is a big commitment, especially for an author that I haven't heard that much about. I don't know that many people who've read this series. And so while the ratings look good, I don't know how this series is going to continue to unfold. I don't know whether this is going to be as strong in book 14 as it is in book 1. And you don't have that guarantee with any series really, but when it is an author who is relatively unknown, that does feel like a bigger risk. That being said, the complexity of the story, all of the components that we have, the way that they connect, the way that they're all branching off into unknown locations that we're potentially going to uncover later down the line is really exciting to me. And something that we really enjoy doing in the book club is trying to connect all of those pieces ourselves. And so far, I feel like the amount of material we have in this book is something we could really dive into in the book club. Something I found really interesting about this book as well is that pretty much exactly in the middle, it really ramps up in pace, not to a point where the tone of the book completely changes, but it feels almost like the book is about to end. Tommy has decided that it's now time to torment Hamilton, which is, really inconvenient for me and Hamilton both. But the plot lines in this book really pick up at the midpoint. We have a lot of conflicts coming to a head, a lot of points of high action across the board, but I feel like Philip C. Quaintrell has managed that really well. Like, it doesn't feel unnatural given the build we've had throughout the first half of it, but also in this second half we are quite naturally settling back into a slightly slower pace, but with things having escalated and changed from this big influx of midpoint action. That's really interesting to me because I'm not somebody who enjoys a lot of high action scenes. Credit to the author as well, because the battle scenes, the fight scenes, all of the action that we've had so far, I have actually enjoyed, which is pretty rare for me. I tend to tone a lot of them out, but I feel like in this book they are dynamic enough that they're holding my attention and I'm not kind of zoning out as those things are unfolding. I guess the final test for this book is going to be how everything comes together. I would love a plot twist. I feel like there have been a couple of surprises in the plot of this book so far, but nothing that I would call a twist. It's more just like a slow realization on the part of the reader of how these perspectives and storylines are converging and banding together. So I would like something really unexpected to happen at the end of this, or for it to be very dynamic or leave us on a cliffhanger to really solidify and round out this one. But so far, having a great time with this. It's really absorbing me, which fantasy is the genre that tends to hook me and pull me in the most, and it's the one that I tend to get the most immersed in. But still, it can be really difficult to hook me and pull me in to the degree that this book has done. And I think part of the reason is that the world is so vast that trying to figure out what's going on and where we're kind of going with this story and how things may be connected is keeping my mind busy enough to really stay locked into this world. I finished The Rise of the Ranger, and it is another 4-star read for me. Going into this video, I knew that I would have absolutely no issue finding books that I enjoyed because all of these are anticipated reads for me. The difficulty, though, is going to lie in deciding which one we should choose for the book club. This one has been the most promising so far in terms of the complexity of the story, the amount of material I feel like we're gonna have to dissect. I really like that we change perspectives so consistently in here, and I have to really lock in and pay attention to continue to pick up and follow the threads of what is going on. I don't really have too much to add in terms of my thoughts while reading this book because I feel like I've covered a lot already. But in terms of the way that this one wrapped up, I did really enjoy it. I liked the point where we left this story. I do feel like it was a choice on the author's part to include the prologue of this book, or to have the prologue contain what it does, given the way that this book ends, because essentially the characters start to discover things that the reader already knows, and the way that it's written and the way it unravels is like we're having these grand revelations, because in the perspective of the characters we're reading from, these are really big things that they didn't know. But it was a little bit underwhelming for me, given that I already knew a lot of these things based on the beginning of the book. That being said, there were a few revelations within the plot that I was not privy to that make me excited to continue on this series. So where we currently stand with one book to go for this vlog, I feel am no closer to picking a series. I'm hoping that Anthony Ryan makes it really, really easy for me, because the two that I'm kind of torn between right now that I feel like would be good options still both have a lot of positives and a lot of drawbacks. The positives for this one is that I I feel, like I said, the level of complexity, the story, the writing is a really great fit for the book club. But the negatives still also remain the same. This is an indie. I don't know whether that is going to cause a lot less investment in the book club and people tapering off, because this is also one of the longest series at 17 books. And as somebody who does prefer to read chronologically, reading this book kind of made me wish I was starting at the beginning of the story. You know, Philip C. Quaintrell, as I've said, says that you can pick this up at any point throughout the story. You can start with any of the 3 series currently set in this world. It's interesting though, because I feel like it's written as though it is giving acknowledgement to something that has already been written. And of course, the author could have gone into this knowing that he was going to write all of these different stories. So it's not too difficult to write it in a way where it feels like you're referring back to something that has already happened, because from the perspective of the characters in this book, you are. But I feel like because the book is written in that way, I personally would like to start at the beginning of the timeline so that when we're referring back to events that have already happened, I already know what those events are. Reading in publication order, of course, does also have its merits because you're reading things in the order that they were actually written. So it's pretty unlikely that you're going to uncover any major spoilers going that way. But I think that if I had a choice, if I could have started with the Ancient series, if that was an option for the book club and it was all fully published, then that is the one that I would have gone with. And that is the one that is actually being traditionally published by the Broken Binding, I think at the beginning of next year as well. So definitely a strong contender. Really loved this. Would love to continue on with it. Whether I continue on with it through Catch Up Book Club or independently though, we're going to have to wait and see. I have finished part 1 of Bloodsong, and besties, I am having a whale of a time. I blew through this whole first chunk yesterday, which is about 180 pages, because I got so invested in this one immediately. It is the personal account of this warrior called Valen Alsorna, who is dropped off on the doorstep of the Sixth Order when he's a child, probably about 10, 11 years old, and his father tells him that he now belongs to the order, but he tells him to trust him, which the main character doesn't really know what that means. So he enters this order where he is to be trained as a fighter, and they're kind of like Knights of the Realm. They don't really swear an allegiance to anyone in particular. They have their own code, their own set of rules, and they will fight on behalf of the realm. While our main character's here, he learns that his only allegiance is to the order. He has no family anymore. The only people that he needs to concern himself with are his brothers, so the other members of the order. But while he's going through his trials to join this order, some odd things happen to him that hint at dissonance within the wider world, which he is not privy to as somebody who is firstly a child, but also as somebody who is currently secluded in this order. So this is his first-hand account of his life, which is a format that is quite common in fantasy. This is reminding me of a bunch of other books that I really love, one of which is of course The Empire of the Vampire, which is once again a first-hand account, and I've actually heard a lot of people talk about Empire of the Vampire in comparison to this book, so that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine that this is also very reminiscent to The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which again follows the same style, although I haven't actually read that one yet. I know, it's just I'm kind of waiting for it to be finished. I don't know if it ever will be, but in the meantime I quite clearly have plenty of other really good fantasy I can dive into while I wait. So it's actually making me want to dive back into the Empire of the Vampire series, because I read book 1 then waited for the whole series to be published, and I need to go back, reread and continue. But this has also reminded me of Red Rising and The Will of the Many, and also a little bit of the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Now the Farseer comparison is mainly because we have this young boy who is dropped off by his family in this completely unfamiliar place and finding his footing within it. It reminds me a lot of Red Rising and The Will of the Many in the way that they remind me of each other. In this one, we don't have a character who is infiltrating a training academy, but I think it does have the same kind of structure, the same kind of viewpoint, with our main character developing a family style relationship with the people around him in a place where he didn't expect it. Now, Valen is a lot more open to this than Viz is or Darrow is, because while he has been unwillingly delivered here, these people are not his enemy, and his end goal is not to destroy them from the inside. But I feel like the way that this story is unfolding, the way that I feel when I'm reading it, is reminding me a lot of those series. So far so good. This, I don't want to say it. This could be a very good book. It could be a very good book, and I'm a little bit scared because I feel like every time I say that, there's just a little something missing. So we'll have to see whether this one remains so strong throughout the entire thing. And it is a chunky one as well. It's the biggest book that I've read for this video. I do like that it's split into sections, because at the beginning of every section, you get Valen's account of where he is in the present day, where he has been captured. He's known as Hope Killer at the minute. So he's killed somebody very important, somebody revered, and he's like a low-key criminal, but people seem to respect him. And he's been put on a ship where I think he's off to fight for a queen. And on this ship is a chronicler who really, really dislikes him because of the person that he's killed. But Valen tells him that the stories that this guy has been writing about him are all wrong. And he then delves into what the true story is. So we have this like flip between timelines as well. Once again, the same as I'm pretty sure The Name of the Wind and also Empire of the Vampire. But I like it when the perspectives are split like that, because I feel like I'm trying to puzzle together what's happening in the present at the same time as we're filling in the blanks of the past and building an attachment to the character that way. I am over 500 pages into Bloodsong, and the vibes are still very, very good. Now, obviously, I've enjoyed every book that I've read for this video, but I think something that sets this one apart is that it really puts you in the perspective of our main character, and that connected me to him very, very quickly. Of all of the books that I've read, I would say that this is the one that I'm the most emotionally invested in. And you guys know that if I'm scared, like if I'm feeling things when I'm reading, then it's a good time. And I think that because of the way this story is told, you know that it's not going to be a happy story. We might eventually have a happy ending, but I feel like when you read books like this, where we're chronicling the entire life story of somebody, especially somebody who's a warrior, and you're meeting them at a later stage in their life, when they're more experienced, when they've seen war, you know you're gonna have some casualties, some life-altering events along the way. And because it's also told in a reflective manner of a character looking back on their life, you also have really ominous parts of the book where they say things like, this is the moment where my life changed forever, and you know something's gonna go down. Now, this is not a perfect book, in spite of how much I'm loving it. This one was published in 2011, which in the grand scheme of literature is not like forever ago, but I have noticed a little bit of fat phobia in here, and you know, female characters, they are scarce, and the few female characters that we have had in here are either in some sort of like maternal knowledge-giving role, or they're romantically interested in him, even if he is not romantically interested in them. Now, this is the only book that I've read from Anthony Ryan so far. I do know that some of his other main characters in, I think especially his newest series maybe, has a very prominent female main character. I can't speak on how the representation is, but this series is definitely very, very masculine. We are also very much surrounded by men in this story. So you have everything that kind of goes with that. You have the carousing of soldiers, we have sex workers mentioned frequently in here, so it is definitely a very masculine, like kind of warrior focused story, which I really do enjoy. Obviously, I'm loving this one, but I think the combination of how masculine this is and the fact that it was published like 15 years ago now, like we could have a little bit more variety in our cast of characters. I do think that there is an element of this that reminds me of Wheel of Time as well, specifically the character of Rand, who is the chosen one of Wheel of Time. And I do think it is Valen's interaction with female characters and the specific instances of where his character does cross with female characters that is reminding me very much of the narrative of Wheel of Time. But I am really enjoying our main character. I love how he is somebody who tries to live his life with honor. He has found himself a place within this brotherhood that he was forced into, and he's kind of just made the most of it, you know. I love a found family, and that is something that we definitely established very early on in here. And at the point in the story that I'm at, we are kind of moving through some of the formative experiences in Valen's career that make him the person that he is in the little interludes that we get. Something that I really enjoyed as well is that this is one of those books where the prologue doesn't make a whole ton of sense until you have some more context. At least to me, like, I rarely remember the first couple of chapters of a fantasy book because I'm still getting my bearings in the world. And the first paragraph of this, I've reread like the first page of the book, and it makes so much more sense now. I'm gonna read it to you. It'll mean nothing, but I'm excited about it, so let's go. It says, "He had many names, although yet to reach his 30th year, history had seen fit to bestow upon him titles aplenty. Sword of the Realm to the Mad King who sent him to plague us, the young hawk to the men who followed him through the trials of war, Darkblade to his Cumbralian enemies, and, as I was to learn much later, Barrelshack to, I don't know how to pronounce that, to the enigmatic tribes of the great northern forest, the shadow of the raven." So that was just like a whole list of things when I originally read it, but now that I'm like deep in this story and I've gone back, I'm like, oh, I know what all of this means. Something that's really interesting about this as well is that this is a world that operates on religion, but there's no God. And I, at first, like when I found out that the order that our main character's a part of was a religious order, I was like, cool, makes perfect sense to me. And it's only as we got further into the book, especially the last 200 pages that I've read, there's a big plot line in the wider world of this story that our main character comes into contact with quite a lot because it's forming a lot of tension in the world, is that the country where we're currently based only follow the faith, and anybody who doesn't follow the faith is executed, and those people are called deniers because they're deniers of the faith. But it's the people of the faith who don't follow a god. They are a godless religion. And I feel like because we're in the perspective of a character who isn't questioning these things about the world, because it's a world that has been this way since he was born, and then obviously at a young age he was put into this order that is a religious order. It's just a part of the world that he accepts until he starts to come into contact with the like kind of denier plot line, and he realizes that there's other faiths out there, and at various points throughout his travels he meets some of those people or is sent to deal with these people, that we start to learn more about the religion. And I'm really intrigued about it because they have no god, but they're a faithful society. Their entire society centers around the faith. And our main character is part of the Sixth Order, which when I originally read the synopsis, I thought that there were, you know, like different battalions of fighters, and his was the sixth, but it's actually the six aspects of the religion. So you have one that's dedicated to like keeping knowledge, one dedicated to healers, and the one that our main character is part of is the one that trains the fighters. So as you can see, I am very enthusiastic about this book, and I'm very, very invested in it. I am really interested to see where this leaves off, because what I know from the interludes of where the main character is now, something very, very drastic happens throughout his life to put him in the position that he's in at the start of this book in the present day. And I don't know whether the narrative of this book is going to catch up to those interludes, or whether the whole trilogy is going to lead us up to the place where he is now. I feel like at some point the past timeline, the recounting of his life, is going to meet the present. I just don't know at what point in the story that's going to be. I've also got through this huge chunk of this book in like 3 days, and I'm not done with what I'm reading today, so I'm going to get even further. So even though it's thick, you can tell I'm absorbed, but also it's a testament to how compelling this book is. It's really hard for me to put down, and the chapters are quite long as well. So I finished Bloodsong last night, and I have a bone to pick with Mr. Anthony Ryan, because there was no need for him to be so cruel to me 2 pages away from the end of this book. We had 2 pages to go. You could have just left it. You didn't have to do what you did. And trust me, he knows exactly what he did. That being said, I do love a little bit of emotional torment. I will say that one thing that I'm talking about really could have done without it, if I'm being honest. As much as I love to be emotionally tortured, could have done without it. But otherwise, I gave this 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. When I put all of these books on my TBR, I did suspect that we would have a 5-star, but coming to the end of this video without one, I was getting a little bit worried. I love that I had an emotional connection to this character, which, as I said, is something that I haven't really had with all of the other books that we've read in this video. And especially when it comes to epic fantasy, those are the books that resonate with me. I also really like that the stakes and the difficulties that our main character was facing in here were extremely realistic. He was stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to do the right thing and act honorably, but being forced into situations that went against his wishes because of the people that he pledged himself to and the people that he was trying to protect. I also really like the messaging on society that we have here. I think that even though this is a very masculine book that has a lot of violence and also surrounds war, there is a lot of messaging in here about the futility of war and the lengths that people will go to either stay in power or to acquire more power for themselves, and how those kinds of people will use other people as pawns to achieve their ends. There was a plot twist at the end where I felt like I knew what direction we were going to be going with that, but I think the way that it manifested was still a little bit of a surprise. And I really liked that Anthony Ryan kind of wrapped up this story in terms of the chronicle. You could actually read this as a standalone, I feel, but he wraps up the chronicling element of this and then leaves the reader with something a little bit extra at the end, just to tie off some loose ends and then also leave it on a really kind of poignant, dramatic moment. Something that I also really liked is that there is a discrepancy between the chronicle that is being written and the account of what happened that we're getting. I was a little bit confused about that though, because the structure of this book is that we have, like I said, the present day with the chronicler who has met Valen and is asking him questions or is trying to set the record straight about what actually happened during some of these like poignant events in Valen's life. And then you cut to a section which is him obviously narrating or telling the story of what happened. But when you cut back to the chronicler, you realize that certain events that we know through that narrative have been left out of the chronicle, and the chronicler isn't aware of that. So I'm wondering in what manner we are receiving the story, because then there's also inconsistencies within the book, because you have a little bit of a unreliable narrator, which we know because we know that Valen is leaving things out of the chronicle, but then the chronicler kind of picks up on that as though the account that we're reading is the chronicle. So I like that we have like the elements of Valen omitting some of the events and only the reader receives that knowledge, but I also think it does make the element of storytelling and the way in which the story is being received a little bit confusing. But regardless of what we're going to do with the book club, I would definitely recommend that you pick this one up if you like similar types of fantasy to me, specifically series like Red Rising, The Will of the Many, and The Realm of the Elderlings. There are a lot of parallels between this and The Realm of the Elderlings, actually, even though it's written from a little bit more of a masculine lens, something more akin to like The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. Speaking of that book club, it is time for us to make a decision. And you know, it was really silly of the host of Catch Up Book Club to nominate me to make this decision, because if you know me, you know that I can't make a decision to save my life. But what I think I have done successfully is narrow this stack down even further. So of the 4 books that I've read for this video, I'm going to immediately take 2 of them out of the mix. So the first one that I am eliminating from this round of Catch Up Book Club is the Black Magician trilogy by Trudy Canavan. I really enjoyed this one. I flew through it. I thought it was very compelling. I really enjoyed the story, but I don't think that there were enough threads and inklings of things to come for us to really dive into in the book club. I just feel like we wouldn't have as much to take apart and discuss in this series as we would have with some of the others. I will definitely be continuing this series independently though, because I really enjoyed it, but alas, we will not be reading this one together. And the second series I'm going to be eliminating is going to be Raven's Shadow by Anthony Ryan. This is by far my favorite book that I've read in this video, but the last 2 series that we have read for Catch Up Book Club have been ones that are very masculine in nature, that are very warrior focused, that center a lot around war in general. They have a lot of gore, a lot of violence. And I mean, some of the other books that we have here are definitely going to focus on themes of like war, because that is like very common in fantasy, regardless of the tone. But I just feel like this is a little bit too similar to what we've been reading recently. And given that we have the option of taking a break from that, that is something that I would like to pursue. I am also very worried about the fact that the rest of the books in this series are not as well regarded as this one. I looked up a couple of reviews of book 2 last night, and it seems like book 2 at least is solid. It's just disappointed in comparison to this. So I'm definitely going to be pursuing this independently. Like, I am so enthusiastic to go into book 2 like right now, honestly, but I am also a little bit scared, a little bit nervous. So you'll definitely find out my thoughts on this series at some point. And you know, because it's epic fantasy and I'm already a part of the Cosmere readathon right now, as well as embarking upon the next year of Catch Up Book Club, maybe I won't get to this sometime soon, and it would definitely be a contender for the book club down the line. I just want to go in a little bit of a different direction for this round specifically, which leaves us with our final 2 contenders, which are the ones that I'm torn between, and they are of course Michael J. Sullivan's World of Elon and Philip C. Quaintrell's World of Verda. Now, these two have a lot of similarities with each other. I would say that the storytelling method is different, but the themes, the structure of the narrative, the structure of the world as a whole, the focus of the types of magic and magical creatures that we have in both of these series are very, very similar. And they are also the 2 longest options of the 4 that we started out with. So whichever one we go for, we are signing up to it for a very, very long time. Now, I am really excited by the idea of doing the World of Elon because I was instantly captivated by this. Michael J. Sullivan is a well-known, well-regarded author. I also think that he's an author who's on a lot of people's TBRs that people have heard a lot about and want to explore and haven't had the opportunity yet or want to be held accountable for that, which is perfect for the book club. There are a couple of accessibility issues with this series, like I mentioned. Not all of them are published by the same publisher. Some of them are harder to get hold of than others, but given the length of this book club overall, I do feel like that gives people ample opportunity to hunt down the books in this world that are a little bit more difficult to get your hands on. And at least the first 3 books are pretty easy to find. The thing that worries me about this is that I'm pretty sure that the majority of the books, at least in this first series, have a self-contained plot with little threads like going off into other things. And I don't know how prominent those threads are. I don't know how they come together. I don't know whether the rest of the books by Michael J. Sullivan in the other series also have that same kind of structure, or whether they more focus on more in-depth things. Something that's really promising to me about Michael J. Sullivan is that I believe he writes all of the series before he publishes a single book. So he knows where the story is going and he has time to go back and make sure everything connects, which leads me to believe that this is a really thought out, well-connected world. The other thing that worries me about this is the scheduling for the book club, because all of the books are shorter than we typically read, and we are typically a bi-monthly book club because we read longer books. In the example of this series, we would definitely be doing a bind up per live show, which is 2 books, but going forward, I'm gonna have to like think of how that's gonna work, especially to intersect with other read-alongs that I'm a part of and that some of you guys may also be following along with as well, so nothing gets too overwhelming. When it comes to Philip C. Quaintrell, this is the book that I found the most promising in terms of the amount of material that we would have to discuss in the live shows. I think that this is the most complex of the 4 options, and it's the one that I had to pay the most attention to follow along with. And that's a good thing for me, because that means that we have a lot happening. So it's kind of like consuming all of my brain activity at the time when I'm reading, which as somebody with a little bit of an attention span problem is a really good thing. I also really enjoyed my time reading this one. I think the fact that it's multi-perspective and puts us so close to the characters gives great potential for emotional attachment as the series goes. I also like the structure of this world, which is the same same structure as this world, where we have the Ancient series and then multiple series that feature Asher, so you can get to know him a little bit better and also see how everything threads together. The things that concern me about this one is that as it is an indie, which once again, indies are great, and I will be pursuing whichever one of these series doesn't end up being the book club series, I will still be reading. But because it's an indie and because we're asking people to sign up for 17 books with potential of more to come, I don't know what the interest is going to be in this one. I don't know how many people are going to want to sign up for something that wasn't already on their radar. And then you have the accessibility issues of you can't borrow this from your library. You, with a couple of exceptions, can only really purchase it from Amazon. There also isn't as much surety as there is with Michael J. Sullivan in terms of how consistent the books are as you go throughout the series. Are they all as good as this one? I have absolutely no idea, but I feel like the biggest drawback for me as a reader is that given that I have the option of reading this in chronological order or publication order, and Philip C. Quaintrell says it doesn't really matter, I personally would prefer to read it in chronological order, and that is not an option that is available to me right now. I mean, I can start the series that's set like 1,000 years before this one, but I can't finish it because it's not fully published yet. The good news about this series though is that the Broken Binding are traditionally publishing that Ancient series, and they're actually reprinting the hardbacks that they did of this series. So these are about to become more accessible. If we read a different series, by the time we finish this, because it's like 20 books, there will assumedly be more World of Verda books released. Some of them will have been traditionally published. More people will have heard of Philip C. Quaintrell, which would definitely line this one up as a possibility for the future if it isn't chosen now. But part of me wants to wholeheartedly go into this one and do something a little bit different and support and promote and uplift an indie author as opposed to going with something traditionally published. Also, as a really weird coincidence, while I've been making this video, the Broken Binding have announced their reprint of the first 3 books in the Echoes saga. They've done the cover reveal for the first book in the older series, the Time of Dragons cover reveal, and they've also announced that the next series on their regular fantasy sub is going to be the Rhaenyra Revelations. I think it's the fantasy sub. Yeah, it's the fantasy sub they're doing it for. So I feel like they're listening in to my correspondence. I'm worried that they've tapped my communications. So my original plan, of course, was to announce at the end of the video which series we were going to be reading, but unfortunately I am not going to be able to do that today. What I have done though is given the host my verdict, and I'm currently waiting on them to vote on which series they would prefer that we pursue for the book club. But I also want to get your guys' feedback because you are the ones who are going to be signing away 1+ years of your reading time to pursue and join this book club. So let me know down in the comments. I think there's a poll option that I can put somewhere, but if not, just comment and let me know which of these series you would rather we pursued for Catch Up Book Club. Give your reasoning as well if you would like to. And in a couple of weeks, I will post the announcement with the final decision of what we are going to be reading. But as I can't give you the information on which series we're going to be following, which was my original plan, what I can let you guys know is that the first live show for this round of Catch Up Book Club is going to be in November. So don't worry, we still have plenty of time, and I'll get that announcement to you as soon as possible once I've spoken to the host and also gotten your guys' feedback. This was actually a really fun video. I've been meaning to read a lot more epic fantasy recently anyway, and I feel like I'm really doing that this year. A little bit frustrating though, because I've essentially just started 4 series, all of which I've enjoyed, to only ultimately be guaranteed to pursue one of them, which doesn't really fit into my goal of trying to continue on with and finish more series as opposed to start them. But I do hope that you guys have enjoyed this one. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you guys would like to let me know you were here, I mean, you have to vote, right? You have to leave your vote on what series we're gonna read. But if you're not invested in that decision and just would like to let me know that you were here, then feel free to leave me a music emoji for Blood Song. But aside from that, guys, I do hope you've enjoyed this one if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under all her petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.